The stagecoach wheel found every single rock on the trail to Fort Benton. Eleanor Hayes, 22 years old and a world away from Boston, felt the jolts in her bones. She clutched the hard wooden seat, her knuckles white. She was here to be a schoolteacher. A new life, a noble purpose. But the man sitting across from her saw something else in her eyes. He was old, weathered, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "First time out west, miss?" Eleanor straightened her spectacles. "Is it that obvious?" "Everyone's got that look," he said, gesturing with a hand that was missing 2 fingers. "The look that says you think you understand this place." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "You don't." The beautiful, sweeping plains outside the window suddenly felt less like a painting and more like a trap. "Be careful," the old man whispered, his gaze flicking toward the horizon. "The tensions with the Blackfeet. They're not just tensions. It's a slow-burning fire. And you, miss, you look like kindling." Eleanor nodded, a polite Boston nod, but a cold knot formed in her stomach. Her brother James had written to her about the teaching opportunities. He had described the clear air and the big sky. He had not mentioned the fire. When the stagecoach finally lurched into Fort Benton at nightfall, the town was a collection of jagged shadows and oil lamp ghosts. The sound of a tinny piano and rough laughter bled from a saloon, and for a moment Eleanor thought about getting right back on the coach and heading east. "Eleanor!" A voice cut through the noise. It was James. But not the James she knew. The clean-shaven boy from her memories was gone, replaced by a frontiersman with a thick beard and eyes that darted nervously into the shadows. "James," she said, her voice tight as she hugged him. "You look different." "And you still look like a proper Boston lady," he laughed, but the sound was hollow. "That'll change." He grabbed her luggage, his grip too tight. As they walked down the dusty main street, she felt eyes on her. Not curious eyes, hungry eyes. "Word travels fast," James said, not looking at her. "Everyone's eager to meet the new school teacher." But his tone said something else entirely. It said everyone was eager to see how long she'd last. His cabin was small, on the very edge of town, as if it were trying to escape. That night, as she unpacked her books, James sat at the table, staring at the rough-hewn wood. He didn't look like a man welcoming his sister. He looked like a man delivering a death sentence. "There's something I should tell you, Ellie," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "About the school." He paused, and the silence stretched, filled only by the howl of the wind outside. "The last teacher," James said, finally looking up, his eyes filled with a fear she had never seen before. "He didn't just leave, Ellie. He vanished." The room suddenly felt colder. Vanished. The word hung in the air between them. "But that's not the worst part," James continued, his voice cracking. "The school. It's not just for settler children. There are 2 Blackfeet children enrolled." Eleanor stared at him, confused. "I came here to teach children, James. All children." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Your Boston idealism is going to get you killed out here, Ellie. Chief Running Eagle sent them to build peace. But not everyone in town wants peace." He leaned across the table. "And the Blackfeet. They don't trust us. Not after what happened to the last teacher." "What did happen to him?" she asked, her own voice a whisper now. James just shook his head, looking away. "No one knows. One day he was there. The next, gone." They found his classroom torn apart. And on the blackboard, just one word, written in blood. "Savage." The next morning, the schoolhouse felt less like a place of learning and more like a tomb. It was a single room, cold and silent. As she arranged her books on the desk, she noticed dark stains on the floorboards, half scrubbed but still there. She ran her hand over the blackboard, imagining the bloody word. The door creaked open. A man stood there, so tall he seemed to fill the entire doorway. He was Native American, his face a mask of hard lines and stoic resolve. At his side were 2 children, a boy and a girl, their dark eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. "You are the new teacher," he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Eleanor said, forcing her voice to be steady. I'm Miss Hayes. I am Swift Hawk, he replied, his eyes scanning every inch of her, as if searching for a weakness. These children are my responsibility. Little Fox, my nephew, and Dawn Star. Welcome, Eleanor said, offering the children a warm smile. They didn't return it. Swift Hawk's gaze was unsettling. Teaching is good. Understanding is better. My brother, Chief Running Eagle, believes peace comes through knowledge. I am not so sure. He looked pointedly at the stained floorboards. The last teacher did not understand. He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway, his silhouette stark against the morning light. I watch over these children, Miss Hayes. Always. Remember that. And then he was gone. As the settler children trickled in, a clear line was drawn down the middle of the room. The 10 white children huddled on one side. Little Fox and Dawn Star sat alone on the other. The air was thick with a silence that was louder than any shouting. Eleanor decided to face it head on. Today, we'll begin by introducing ourselves. One by one, the settler children mumbled their names. Then, an uncomfortable silence fell. Little Fox stood, his small frame straight and proud. I am Little Fox. My father is Running Eagle, chief of the Blackfeet. A boy in the back, the sheriff's son, let out a snicker. My pa says your kind shouldn't be in our school. My pa says your kind shouldn't be on our land, Little Fox shot back, his voice clear as a bell. Before Eleanor could intervene, the door swung open again. This time it was Sheriff Miller, a stern-faced man with a thick gray mustache and a star pinned to his vest. He wasn't there for a friendly visit. Miss Hayes, he said, his eyes hard as stone. A word. He led her outside, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. I heard you had some trouble. Nothing I couldn't handle, Sheriff. Let me be clear, the sheriff growled, stepping closer. Having those children in here is a mistake. It's stirring up a hornet's nest. The last teacher learned that the hard way. What happened to him exactly? Eleanor pressed. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He got what was coming to him. He didn't respect the boundaries. Boundaries are what keep us alive out here, miss. You'd do well to remember that. He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving her standing in the dust. She felt a chill crawl up her spine. It wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. That night, James was more agitated than ever. The sheriff came to see me, he said, pacing the cabin. He told me to get you on the next stagecoach back to Boston. I'm not leaving, Eleanor said, her jaw set. You don't get it, Ellie. This isn't just about prejudice. Something else is going on in this town. People are scared. Homesteads are being raided. Cattle stolen. The sheriff blames the Blackfeet, but... He stopped, running a hand through his hair. It doesn't add up. What doesn't add up? The raids are too clean, too organized. It's not the Blackfeet way. He looked at her, his eyes pleading. Just be careful. Don't trust anyone. Not the sheriff. Not the ranchers. Maybe not even me. What she didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that from the ridge overlooking the town, Swift Hawk was watching the lights in her cabin. He had been there every night since she arrived. He wasn't just protecting the children. He was investigating a murder. And the new schoolteacher was now the bait in his trap. The weeks that followed were a tightrope walk over a canyon. Eleanor taught her divided classroom, the silence between the two groups a constant humming tension. Little Fox and Dawn Star were brilliant, soaking up every word, their minds sharp and hungry. But they remained isolated, islands in a sea of hostility. Swift Hawk was always there. A shadow on the horizon, a flicker of movement in the trees. He never spoke to her, but she felt his presence constantly, a silent, unnerving guardian. One afternoon she took the children outside for a nature lesson. As they sketched plants by a small creek, Little Fox approached her. My uncle does not trust white people, he said quietly, not looking at her. He says you have a good heart, but he also says you see the world through glass that makes everything look simple. What does he mean? Eleanor asked. The boy looked up, his eyes ancient and wise. He means you see a classroom. he sees a battlefield. That evening, Eleanor sought out the same creek to read, hoping to find a moment of peace. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery colors. A shadow fell over her book. "It is not safe for a woman to be alone here," Swift Hawk said. He had appeared from nowhere, silent as smoke. Eleanor's heart leaped into her throat. "You frightened me." "Good," he said, his face impassive as he sat on a nearby rock. "Fear keeps people alive." His eyes locked onto hers. "Why do you stay, Miss Hayes?" "The other teacher. He was not brave." "What happened to him?" she asked directly. A flicker of something, anger, pain, crossed his face before it vanished. "He learned that words are not enough. Actions are what matter." He stood suddenly, his body tensing. "You teach our children the white man's words, but can you teach them the white man's justice?" Before she could answer, shouts erupted from the town. Swift Hawk was moving before the sound even faded, a predator sensing blood. "Stay here," he commanded, but she didn't. She grabbed her things and ran after him. The scene outside the saloon was a powder keg waiting for a spark. A crowd of angry settlers had surrounded a lone Blackfeet man. A rancher named Jenkins was red-faced, jabbing a finger in the man's chest. "He stole my horses, 3 of them. I saw him near my property." Sheriff Miller was there, but he wasn't keeping the peace. He was watching, his hand on his gun, letting the anger build. "Where is your proof?" Swift Hawk's voice boomed, cutting through the mob's fury. Jenkins spat on the ground. "Don't need proof with his kind. Everyone knows you're thieves." "That's not fair!" Eleanor's voice rang out, sharp and clear. She pushed her way to the front, standing between Jenkins and the accused man. The crowd recoiled, shocked to see the schoolteacher in the middle of a brawl. "Stay out of this, schoolmarm," Jenkins snarled. "This is a delicate situation, Miss Hayes," the sheriff warned, his voice cold. Swift Hawk moved, placing himself slightly in front of Eleanor. "The teacher speaks the truth. Your law says a man is innocent until proven guilty. Or does that law have a color?" Hands were hovering over pistols. The air crackled. The town was about to explode. Then, a voice cut through the tension from the back of the crowd. "I saw the Johnson boys riding east this morning, Jenkins." It was Mrs. Wilson, the quiet widow who ran the general store. "They were leading 3 horses that looked an awful lot like yours." The crowd shifted. The Johnson brothers were known troublemakers, white men with a reputation for theft and violence. The sheriff, seeing his chance to de-escalate, cleared his throat. "Is that so? We'll look into it." As the mob reluctantly dispersed, Swift Hawk grabbed Eleanor's arm, pulling her and the children away. His grip was like iron. "You should not have done that," he said, his voice a low growl once they were clear. "You made yourself a target." "I couldn't just stand there." "Your heart is good but foolish," he said, his expression softening for just a fraction of a second. "You think this was about horses? This was a test. And now, they know you will not break." Later that night, as Eleanor tried to process the day's events, a frantic knock came at the cabin door. It was Dawn Star, her small body trembling, her eyes wide with terror. "Men," she whispered, her voice choked with sobs. "They came to our camp. Angry men. They hurt my father." James grabbed his coat and his rifle. "I'll get the doctor. You stay here, Ellie. It's too dangerous." "They are my students," she said, wrapping a shawl around herself, her face set like stone. "I'm coming with you." The Blackfeet camp was a scene of brutal violation. Tents were slashed, belongings scattered and trampled. Men with covered faces had stormed through, not to kill, but to terrorize, to send a message. Swift Hawk was kneeling over an older man, Dawnstar's father, tending a bloody gash on his arm. His face was a thundercloud of controlled rage. "Who did this?" James demanded. "Vengeance for horses that were never stolen," Swift Hawk said, his voice tight. He looked directly at Eleanor. "This is the frontier your people created." As the doctor worked, Eleanor moved through the camp, helping the women pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. She found a small, handcrafted doll, its dress torn, lying in the dirt. As she picked it up, She saw something else glinting underneath. It was a cufflink, ornate, silver, with the initial M engraved on it. It wasn't something a poor rancher like Jenkins or the Johnson brothers would own. She quickly pocketed it, her mind racing. As dawn approached, she found Swifthawk standing alone, watching the mountains. "Your brother wants you to leave," he said without looking at her. "He is right to worry." "I won't abandon these children," she said fiercely. He turned, his eyes searching her face in the pale light. "You still believe peace is possible?" "I have to." A brief, sad smile touched his lips. "Hope is a dangerous thing, Miss Hayes." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the quiet morning. "But you were brave tonight. You saw more than just the anger. You saw the people." He paused. "And they saw you." What he didn't say was that the attack wasn't random. It was a response. A response to her standing up for justice in the street. The people who ran this town had seen her, and now they were going to try to break her. The attack on the camp shattered the fragile peace of Fort Benton. When Eleanor arrived at the schoolhouse, only 6 of the 10 settler children were there. Little Fox and Dawn Star sat in their usual seats, silent and watchful. Sarah Miller, the sheriff's daughter, was one of the few who had come. "Pa said it's not safe," Sarah whispered to Eleanor. "But Ma said you were brave, and that learning is more important than being scared." Eleanor's heart ached. She started the day's lessons, but the empty seats felt like accusations. During a reading exercise, she noticed Little Fox wasn't paying attention. His gaze was fixed on the window, his young face etched with a worry that didn't belong on a child. At the midday break, she knelt by his desk. "Is everything all right, Little Fox?" He met her eyes, and she saw a storm brewing in their depths. "My father, Running Eagle, has sent messengers to the other bands. He seeks justice." A cold dread washed over Eleanor. "What kind of justice?" "The old way," the boy said simply. The words hung in the air, heavy with the promise of blood. That evening, the hornet's nest the sheriff had warned her about was buzzing. Sheriff Miller and a posse of grim-faced ranchers, including the volatile Jenkins, were gathered at James's cabin. Eleanor listened from the shadows of the kitchen. "The Blackfeet are gathering warriors," the sheriff said, his voice grim. "Running Eagle might talk peace, but his young men are hungry for a fight. We need to be ready." "What about the men who attacked their camp?" Eleanor stepped out of the kitchen, unable to stay silent. "Have you arrested them?" The room went quiet. Every eye turned to her. Sheriff Miller's face hardened. "We're investigating, Miss Hayes." "Investigating?" she challenged, her voice ringing with scorn. "Or protecting? I found this at the camp." She held up the silver cufflink, the engraved M catching the lamplight. "Does this look like it belongs to the Johnson brothers?" The sheriff's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He took a step toward her. "Where did you find that?" "On the ground, dropped by one of the men with covered faces." She looked directly at him. "Your initial is M, isn't it, Sheriff Miller?" A collective gasp went through the room. James shot her a terrified look. Jenkins's hand went to his gun. The sheriff laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You've got a lot of fire, Miss Hayes, but you're aiming at the wrong man. My cufflinks have been on my dresser all week. My wife can attest to it." He smiled, a predator's smile. "But it's interesting you'd find something so incriminating. Makes a man wonder what you were really doing out there." The other men started murmuring. The accusation had been turned back on her. She was now a sympathizer, a traitor. After the men left, their threats hanging in the air, James turned on her, his face pale with fear. "Ellie, what have you done? You can't accuse the sheriff. He is the law. He's corrupt, James. Can't you see it?" "I see that you've put a target on our backs," he shouted. "This isn't Boston. You can't just fight the system. The system will bury you." The next morning, Swifthawk was waiting for her outside the empty schoolhouse. He must have been listening again. "Accusing the sheriff was a mistake," he said, his voice low and urgent. "A foolish one." "He's lying," she insisted. "Of course he is," Swifthawk said, impatience flashing in his eyes. "But you have no proof, only a trinket." Now he knows you are a threat he must remove. He stepped closer. The situation is worse than you know. Running Eagle is losing control. The young warriors are listening to another voice now. A warrior named Stone Calf, who believes peace is a fool's dream. What will happen? War, he said, the word like a stone. Unless your people deliver justice for the attack on my people. And now, because of you, the man responsible for that justice is the one who may have ordered the attack. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something close to despair in his eyes. The children must not come to school. It is no longer safe. But their education. They cannot learn if they are dead, he interrupted, his voice sharp as a razor. You still see with those glass eyes, Miss Hayes. You see books and children. You do not see the hate. Later that day, the schoolhouse door burst open. It was Sheriff Miller, but he wasn't there to talk. He had 2 of his deputies with him. Eleanor Hayes, he said, a triumphant smirk on his face. You're under arrest. Arrest? For what? She gasped. For conspiring with the Blackfeet, for inciting violence. We have a witness, Miss Hayes. A witness who saw you give the cufflink to one of the Blackfeet warriors, planting evidence to frame me. It was a lie. A complete, outrageous lie. Who? She demanded. Who is your witness? A man stepped out from behind the deputies. It was Jenkins, the rancher whose horses had supposedly been stolen. A smug, hateful grin was plastered on his face. I saw her, he said, clear as day. They dragged her from the schoolhouse, her mind reeling. This was the trap. She hadn't just made herself a target. She had walked right into the snare. As they pushed her toward the town's small, filthy jail, she saw James watching from his cabin, his face a mask of helpless terror. She was alone, accused of treason, and the man who held the key to her cell was the very man she believed was trying to start a war. The town was a tinderbox, and Sheriff Miller had just struck the match, using her as the flint. The jail cell was a cold, damp box with a single barred window. Eleanor sat on the hard cot, the sheriff's false accusation echoing in her mind. It was a perfect trap, her word against a rancher and the town's chief lawman. She was the outsider, the idealist from Boston, who sympathized with the savages. No one would believe her. Hours bled into one another. Through the window, she could hear the town buzzing with rumor and anger. She was the talk of Fort Benton, the teacher who had betrayed them. Late that night, she heard the scrape of a key in the lock. It wasn't the sheriff. It was James. His face was drawn and pale in the lantern light. Ellie, what were you thinking? He whispered, closing the door behind him. I was thinking the truth mattered, she whispered back, her voice hoarse. The truth won't keep you from a hangman's noose, he said, his voice trembling. He looked around nervously. I talked to the sheriff. He made me an offer. What kind of offer? James wouldn't meet her eyes. He said if you sign a confession, admitting you were misled by the Blackfeet, he'll put you on the next stagecoach out of town. No trial. You just have to disappear. Eleanor stared at her brother in disbelief. And you want me to sign it? You want me to lie? To say the Blackfeet are guilty? I want you to live, he hissed, his fear finally boiling over into anger. Do you have any idea what's happening out there? A settler family, the Clarks, was found dead this morning. Their homestead burned to the ground. They found Blackfeet arrows at the scene, war party markings. The blood drained from Eleanor's face. The Clarks. They had 2 children in her school. The town is forming a militia, James said, his voice dropping. They're going to ride on the Blackfeet camp at dawn. They're talking about wiping them out. All of them. Women, children, everyone. Your confession is the only thing that might give the sheriff reason to control them. It was another lie. Another twist of the knife. Miller didn't want to control the mob. He wanted to unleash it. The confession wouldn't prevent a massacre. It would justify it. It would be the legal document that sanctioned a slaughter. No, Eleanor said, her voice shaking but firm. I won't do it. Ellie, please, he begged, grabbing the bars of her cell. "Think about what you're doing." "I am," she said, her eyes burning with a cold fire. "And I'm thinking about Little Fox and Dawn Star. I will not sign their death warrant." James stumbled back, his face a mask of defeat and despair. "Then God help us all," he whispered, and left her alone in the darkness. But she wasn't alone for long. A few hours before dawn, a pebble hit her window. She looked out and saw a shadow detach itself from the deeper shadows of the alleyway. It was Swift Hawk. He gestured for her to be quiet, then pointed to the lock on her cell door. A long, thin piece of metal slid into the keyhole from the outside. There was a soft click, and the door swung open. Standing there was Sarah Miller, the sheriff's own daughter, her face pale with determination, a set of keys clutched in her hand. "My mother doesn't believe what they're saying about you," the girl whispered, her eyes wide. "She says my father. He hasn't been the same lately. He meets with those men, the Johnson brothers, the ones who really stole the horses." She heard them talking. About the Clark family. They were laughing. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Miller, the Johnsons, Jenkins. They weren't just stirring up trouble. They were orchestrating a war. The stolen horses, the camp raid, and now a massacre they had pinned on the Blackfeet. They wanted the land, and they were willing to drown it in blood to get it. "You have to go," Sarah urged, pushing her toward the door. "Swift Hawk is waiting." "Thank you, Sarah," Eleanor whispered, squeezing the girl's hand. She slipped out into the alley. Swift Hawk was there with 2 horses. He didn't say a word, just helped her mount. They rode out of town, silent as ghosts, the sounds of the drunken, angry militia gathering at the saloon fading behind them. They rode hard, the wind whipping at her face. They were heading not away from the danger, but straight into its heart, the Blackfeet camp. "The militia will ride at dawn," she said, her voice breathless. "They think your people killed the Clark family." "Running Eagle gave no such order," Swift Hawk said, his face grim. "But Stone Calf and his warriors. They have been missing from the camp since yesterday. So it could have been them?" "It is possible," he admitted. "Revenge is a powerful poison. But the timing is too perfect. This is what the sheriff wanted." As they neared the valley where the camp was nestled, they saw the glow of many fires. The Blackfeet were not sleeping. They were preparing for war. They were met by warriors with painted faces and drawn bows. Swift Hawk spoke to them in their native tongue, his voice sharp and commanding. They were led through the tense camp to the central teepee, where Chief Running Eagle sat with his council. The chief was an older man, his face a roadmap of wisdom and sorrow. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes piercing. "My brother says you bring a warning," the chief said. "The white teacher, who sits in the white man's jail, rides to warn us of a white man's attack." "Why?" "Because I am not trying to save one side," Eleanor said, her voice clear and strong despite her exhaustion. "I am trying to save all of us. Sheriff Miller is lying. He and a group of ranchers murdered the Clark family to provoke this war." A murmur went through the council. Running Eagle held up a hand for silence. "You have proof of this?" "The sheriff's own daughter freed me. She heard him with the men who did it." Just then, a warrior burst into the teepee. "Riders approach, many of them. They carry rifles and torches." The militia was early. Swift Hawk turned to her, his face a mask of grim resolve. "You came to warn us, but you may have only delivered yourself to the slaughter." "Is Stone Calf here?" Running Eagle demanded of the warrior. "He has just returned," the warrior said. "He and his men have trophies from the Clark homestead." The air in the teepee went ice cold. The lie was not a lie. Blackfeet warriors had been there. They had killed the family, or had they? The militia thundered into the valley, a wave of hate and firelight. They stopped at the edge of the camp, a clear line of armed men facing a line of armed Blackfeet warriors. James was among them, his face conflicted and terrified. Sheriff Miller was at the front, his expression triumphant. This was the moment he had engineered. The final bloody act. "Running Eagle!" the sheriff shouted. "We know what you did! We found your arrows in the bodies of our women and children. We are here for justice. Chief Running Eagle stepped forward, unarmed, his hands raised in a sign of peace. Swift Hawk and Eleanor were right behind him. "Eleanor!" James cried out, his voice filled with shock and fear when he saw her. "What is she doing with them?" Jenkins snarled. "The traitor!" "There has been a great crime," Running Eagle said, his powerful voice carrying across the tense space. "But you have been deceived." "Deceived?" Miller laughed. "We have the proof. Your warrior, Stone Calf, he led the raid." On cue, Stone Calf, a powerfully built warrior with eyes full of hate, pushed his way to the front of the Blackfeet line. He held up a scalp of long blonde hair, Mrs. Clark's hair. A roar of fury went up from the militia. "I took this from the white woman who stole our land," Stone Calf boomed. "I killed them all for the honor of our people." It was over. The confession, the trophy. There was no way to stop the bloodshed now. "Wait!" Eleanor screamed, stepping forward, placing herself directly between the two armed groups. "It's a lie." "Ellie, get back!" James yelled. She ignored him, her eyes locked on Sheriff Miller. "You planned this. You wanted this." Then she turned to Stone Calf. "And you helped him." Stone Calf spat on the ground. "I helped no white man." "Didn't you?" Eleanor's mind was racing, fitting the pieces together. The cufflink, the Johnsons, the laughing. The arrows you left. They were meant to be found. The scalp. "You're not mourning, you're boasting. This isn't justice. It's a performance." She looked back at the sheriff. "What did you promise him, Sheriff? A place of power when Running Eagle is dead and the peace treaty is broken? Leadership of a new warlike tribe?" Miller's face went white with rage. "She's insane. Kill them all." But a seed of doubt had been planted. James was looking from the sheriff to Stone Calf, his face a mess of confusion. "My scouts followed Stone Calf's tracks from the Clark homestead," Swifthawk said suddenly, his voice cold and clear. "They did not lead back here. They led to the old abandoned silver mine, the same mine the Johnson brothers used to hide their stolen goods." The sheriff's eyes darted nervously toward the mine. "And another thing," Eleanor said, her voice rising. "The Clark family. They weren't just simple homesteaders. Mr. Clark used to work for the Land Survey Office. He was a map maker. He was the one who drew the original boundaries for the reservation." She looked directly at Miller. "I wonder what he might have found recently. An error in the survey? Proof that this whole valley, with its rich soil and access to water, was supposed to be Blackfeet land?" The motive was suddenly clear. It wasn't just hate. It was greed. A massive land grab, orchestrated by the sheriff. He had used Stone Calf's ambition and his people's anger as his weapon. "Lies!" Miller screamed, drawing his pistol. "Fire!" But no one fired. The settlers were looking at each other, at the sheriff, the confidence in their rage beginning to crumble. "He's the traitor!" Eleanor shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the sheriff. "He killed the Clarks to cover up his crimes and steal this land, and he was willing to kill all of you to do it." With a roar of fury, Miller aimed his pistol not at the Blackfeet, but directly at Eleanor. A single shot rang out, but it wasn't from the sheriff's gun. Sheriff Miller crumpled to the ground, a look of shock on his face, a dark hole appearing in his chest. Everyone turned. Standing behind the militia line, a smoking rifle in his hands, was James. He had chosen a side. For a moment, there was a stunned silence. Then, all hell broke loose. Stone Calf, seeing his plan had failed, let out a war cry and charged, not at the settlers, but at Running Eagle. He saw his path to power disappearing and made a desperate play, but Swifthawk was faster. He moved like lightning, intercepting Stone Calf. The two warriors crashed together in a brutal, desperate fight. The Johnson brothers, seeing the sheriff fall, tried to make a run for it. But the other ranchers, the ones who had been deceived, turned on them, their faces twisted with the rage of betrayal. The fight was no longer settler versus native. It was justice versus corruption. Eleanor ran to James, who stood frozen, the rifle still in his hands, his eyes wide with the shock of what he'd done. "James," she said softly, taking the gun from his trembling fingers. He looked at her, his eyes full of tears. He was going to kill you, Ellie. You saved me, she said. You saved everyone. By the time the sun was fully risen, the short, vicious battle was over. Swift Hawk stood over the bound form of Stone Calf, his face bruised but triumphant. The Johnson brothers and the rest of Miller's cronies were rounded up by the very militia they had manipulated. The truth had come out, but it had been paid for in blood. In the aftermath, an uneasy quiet fell over the valley. The settlers and the Blackfeet stood in two separate groups, no longer enemies, but not yet friends. They were two peoples who had been pushed to the brink of mutual annihilation by the greed of one man. James was cleared of any wrongdoing, hailed as a hero for stopping the corrupt sheriff. The evidence of Miller's land-grabbing scheme was found in his office, along with documents proving he had been blackmailing Stone Calf for months. The schoolhouse reopened. This time, all the children came. They sat together, not in divided groups, but as classmates. The silence was gone, replaced by the quiet hum of learning. The wall between them had been broken down by a shared trauma. A few weeks later, Eleanor stood on the hill overlooking the town. Swift Hawk came to stand beside her. Running Eagle has offered the evidence of the false treaty to the government, he said. They may listen. They may not. The fight is not over. But the war is, she said softly. He nodded. You have taught us a great deal, Eleanor Hayes. Not with words from a book, but with a heart that refused to see boundaries. He looked at her, his dark eyes no longer guarded, but open and full of a feeling she was just beginning to understand. When you first came, I thought you were weak. I was wrong. You are the strongest person I have ever known. He reached out and took her hand. It wasn't a secret touch in the shadows, but a public gesture, a bridge being built between two worlds. Your path and my path are very different, he said. But they seem to be heading in the same direction, she replied, her heart swelling with a hope that no longer felt dangerous, but felt like a promise. She had come to Montana to teach children. Instead, she had taught an entire town the meaning of justice. She had faced down corruption, exposed a killer, and stopped a war. She had found something she never expected in this harsh, beautiful land. She had found a home. If you enjoyed this story and want to see what happens next in the town of Fort Benton, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments if you think James did the right thing, and where in the world you're watching from. Thanks for being part of the story.